There is a photograph. 7 people standing at a trailhead somewhere in southern Siberia, wearing heavy packs, squinting against late summer light. They are smiling. The youngest is 15 years old. The oldest is 41. They are looking at the camera the way people do when they believe they are going to come home. Within 72 hours, 6 of them will be dead on a mountainside at 2,396 meters above sea level. The 7th will walk out of the wilderness alone, covered in blood that is not her own, unable to speak. No one will understand what happened to them. Not really. Not then. Not now. The Khamar-Daban mountain range cuts across the southern edge of Siberia like a geological wound, a thick ridge of ridges that runs parallel to the northern shore of Lake Baikal, one of the deepest and most ancient bodies of water on Earth. The range is not among the world's most dramatic. It does not reach the altitudes of the Himalayas or the Andes. Its peaks are rounded by time, its slopes dense with taiga forest in the lower elevations, opening into exposed alpine meadow and wind-scoured plateau above the treeline. It is beautiful in the way that remote Siberian wilderness tends to be beautiful, immense and indifferent, a landscape that tolerates human presence without acknowledging it. In the summer months, hikers come. The routes are established. The terrain is known. Expeditions have crossed these ridges for decades. By August of 1993, the Khamar-Daban was a familiar destination for the hiking clubs of the region. Not a place that inspired dread, but a place that demanded respect, as all serious mountain terrain demands respect. People had crossed it and returned. They would cross it again. It is important to understand this. These were not reckless people going somewhere they should not have gone. They were not thrill-seekers flirting with danger for the sake of a story to tell afterward. They were experienced, organized, and prepared. They had trained together. They had done this before. This is what makes what happened to them so fundamentally disturbing. Lyudmila Ivanovna Korovina was 41 years old in the summer of 1993. She held the rank of Master of Sports in hiking, a formal Soviet-era designation that required not just physical capability but demonstrated competence in navigation, survival, expedition leadership, and emergency response. She was not a hobbyist. She was a professional, in every meaningful sense of the word. Those who knew her described her as tough, intensely so, some said, with a will and a confidence that bordered on the unyielding. She ran the Azimuth Tourist Club in the city of Petropavl, in Kazakhstan, where she had spent years teaching young people how to move through wild terrain safely and intelligently. Her students trusted her. Her students had followed her into the mountains before and come back. Her daughter, Natalia, was also a hiking instructor. That summer, Natalia was leading her own group in the same range, on a parallel route, with plans to rendezvous with her mother's party on the 5th of August. This detail matters. There was a safety net in place. There was another experienced team nearby, expecting contact, ready to notice if something went wrong. None of it would be enough. With Korovina were 6 students from the Azimuth Club: Alexander Kryson, 23, Tatiana Filipenko, 24, Denis Shvachkin, 19, Victoria Zalasova, 16, Timur Bapanov, 15, and Valentina Yutachenko, 17 years old, known to friends as Valya, who would become, through an accident of circumstance and some quality in her that none of them could have predicted or explained, the only one to survive. They arrived in Irkutsk by train. They had adequate food, adequate equipment, adequate clothing. Korovina called the local weather station before they set out. The forecast was for clear, sunny conditions, the kind of August weather that makes the Siberian highlands feel, briefly, hospitable. On August 2nd, 1993, 7 people walked into the mountains. The first 2 days went well. By the accounts available, the group made good time. The The terrain was challenging but manageable. They climbed the slopes above the Langutai River and moved along the routes Korovina had walked before, ascending toward Retransliator Peak, a prominent summit on the range. The weather held. The group was in good spirits. Then, on the 4th of August, the sky changed. A rainstorm moved in, sudden, heavy, and cold in the way that Siberian mountain weather can be even at the height of summer. The temperature dropped sharply. Rain fell in curtains across the exposed ridgeline. The group was descending from Retransliator when it hit them, and in those conditions, wind-driven rain, dropping temperatures, no shelter in the open alpine zone, the most pressing immediate problem became simply staying warm enough to function. They made camp in an exposed location. They attempted to light a fire. They could not. The wood was wet, the wind was punishing, and the attempt failed. They spent that night cold, huddled together without the warmth of a fire, the temperature outside their tent dropping below freezing. No fire, no dry warmth, just the sound of rain on canvas and the wind moving over the ridge above them. In the morning of August 5th, they finally managed to light a fire. They ate breakfast together. They were cold and they were tired, and the night behind them had been miserable, but they had made it through. The mountain had not broken them. Experienced hikers in difficult conditions, this was within the range of what they had trained for, what they had endured before. They packed their equipment and began their descent. At some point in the hours that followed, something happened on that mountainside that has never been adequately explained. The only account of what occurred comes from Valentina Yutachenko. She was 17 years old, cold and exhausted from a sleepless night, descending a steep slope at nearly 2,400 meters above sea level when everything changed around her in a matter of minutes. Alexander Kryson was at the back of the group. He was 23 years old, and then he was screaming. By Yutachenko's account, the sound that came out of him was not a sound she could categorize. Not a shout, not a cry, but something that described panic at a level below language. When she and the others turned to look, Kryson was on the ground. He was bleeding, not from a wound, not from a fall, from his eyes, his ears, his nose. He was frothing at the mouth. He was convulsing, his body rigid and then loose in rapid succession, and then he went still. Korovina ran to him. The experienced survivalist, the woman who had spent 2 decades leading people through difficult terrain, ran to her student and attempted to rouse him. Whatever she touched, whatever she inhaled, whatever she encountered in that spot, within moments, she too was screaming. The same symptoms, the same violent, inexplicable physical collapse. She fell on top of him and did not get up. Tatyana Filipenko reached Korovina first. She was 24 years old, one of the more experienced members of the student group, and she managed to reach her instructor's side before she, too, was struck. Filipenko grabbed at her own throat, not as if she had been struck, but as if something inside her was failing, as if the air had become something her lungs could no longer process. She crawled toward a rock. She bashed her head against it. She did not stop until she went limp. Viktoria Zalisova, 16, and Timur Bapanov, 15, ran. There is nothing to say about that, except that it was the most human possible response to watching 3 people die in front of you in less time than it takes to fully comprehend what you are seeing. They ran down the slope, and while they ran, they collapsed. They died throwing up blood, tearing at their own clothing, their fingers at their own throats, as if something unseen was strangling them from inside. Denis Shvachkin, 19, managed to put more distance between himself and the others. He ran alongside Yutachenko, and then he too went down, convulsing in the open, and did not rise. Valentina Yutachenko kept running. She ran until she reached the tree-line below. She set up her tent in the shelter of the trees, and she crawled inside, and she waited, in the grip of a terror that no 17-year-old should ever have to carry alone, for whatever had taken her friends to take her as well. Nothing came. She lay there through the night, and nothing happened to her. In the morning, she climbed back up the slope to where her friends had fallen. She needed supplies. She needed what was in their packs if she was going to survive. She walked among the bodies of the people she had trained beside, the people she had crossed those ridges with, and she gathered what she needed. And then she walked. For 4 days, Valentina Yutachenko followed the power line pylons down through the mountains, using them as a navigational thread back toward the world. She had no one to speak to. She had only what she had recovered from the bodies of her friends and the singular, grinding imperative to keep moving. She found a river and followed it. On August 9, 1993, a group of Ukrainian kayakers on the river below the Khamar-Daban range heard something on the shore. A teenage girl emerged from the tree line. She was covered in blood. She was muttering, or perhaps not speaking at all. She could not explain herself clearly. She was barely functional. They took her to the nearest police station. A report was filed on August 9th. No formal search was launched until August 24th, more than 2 weeks after Yutachenko's rescue. The delay has never been fully explained. Investigators would later attribute part of it to the fact that Yutachenko was in no condition to provide coherent directions to the site for some time. She did not speak for several days after her rescue. Whatever she had witnessed on that mountainside had reached into her and removed, temporarily, her ability to put language to experience. When the search team finally reached the site under the direction of Yuri Golias, it took 2 days of helicopter sweeps to locate the bodies. The hikers had been partially undressed when they died, an observation that sparked immediate and understandable concern, since paradoxical undressing is associated with severe hypothermia, a phenomenon in which the dying person's collapsing thermoregulatory system produces a sensation of intense heat, causing them to strip away their own clothing even as they freeze. Some of those who ran had torn at their clothes as they fell. The autopsies were conducted in Ulan-Ude. The findings, in their official form, offered a conclusion that satisfied almost no one who looked at the case closely. 5 of the dead, Krysin, Filipenko, Bapanov, Zalasova, and Shvachkin, were found to have died of hypothermia. Korovina had suffered a heart attack. Protein deficiency related to malnutrition was listed as a contributing factor across the group. Every single body showed signs of bruised lungs. The rescuers who had first reached the site were not convinced by the hypothermia ruling. Valery Tatarnikov and Vladimir Zinov, who participated in the search operation, stated plainly that dying of cold in August conditions seemed impossible to accept as a full explanation. The group had survived the night of the 4th. They had eaten breakfast. They had been moving and active when the collapse occurred. Zinov suggested that some form of acute altitude sickness, high-altitude pulmonary edema, might account for the bleeding, the froth, the bruised lungs. It is a condition that can strike fast and lethally at altitude, flooding the lungs with fluid until the victim cannot breathe regardless of how hard they try. But high-altitude pulmonary edema, while consistent with some symptoms, does not typically cause 6 people to collapse within minutes of each other at the same location. It does not typically produce convulsions of the kind Yutachenko described, and it does not explain why she alone, in the same location, breathing the same air, felt nothing. Other voices offered other theories. Vladimir Borzenkov, a hiker, and Nikolai Fedorov, a member of the search team, suggested infrasound, low-frequency acoustic waves below the threshold of human hearing, which can be generated by certain mountain terrain configurations under certain wind conditions. Infrasound at sufficient intensity has been studied for its potential to cause disorientation, panic, nausea, visual disturbances, and in extreme cases, organ damage. The exposed ridge above 2,400 meters, with the specific topography of the Khamar-Daban, experiencing the kind of high wind conditions that had battered the group the previous night, It is not an impossible context for infrasonic generation, but it remains a theory. The evidence is inferential. No measurements were taken. No instruments were deployed. The suggestion exists, documented, but unprovable. There is another theory, the one that feels most uncomfortable to discuss because of what it implies about the world the group was living in. August 1993 was not a neutral moment in post-Soviet history. The Soviet Union had formally dissolved less than 2 years earlier. The military complex it had built, vast, secretive, geographically spread across territories that are still not fully mapped in the public imagination, did not dissolve with it. The Khamar-Daban region sits within a part of Siberia that hosted, during the Soviet era, a range of classified installations and test ranges. The nerve agent family known as Novichok, agents developed under a Soviet program that persisted into the early 1990s, was still in active development as late as 1993, the year of the tragedy. Some observers have noted that the symptoms Yushchenko described are not entirely inconsistent with acute organophosphate or nerve agent poisoning. Convulsions, bleeding from multiple orifices, sudden collapse, froth at the mouth. That Korovina, the heaviest and perhaps least fit of the group at 41, leading the most strenuous physical activity, suffered cardiac arrest, while the others went into convulsion and hypothermia-like shutdown, could be explained by differential exposure and differential physiological response. This is speculation. It should be stated clearly. No evidence of contamination was found at the site. No testing for chemical agents was reported in the official autopsy record. The Russian and Soviet authorities of the period were not known for their transparency in such matters, which cuts both ways as evidence. It makes the theory neither provable nor dismissible. What can be said is that the official record is incomplete, and the official findings do not fully account for what Valentina Yushchenko witnessed. Yuri Golias, the leader of the search operation, offered the most officially sanctioned explanation: negligence. He accused Korovina of malnutrition, of running an underfed expedition that left the group physically depleted and vulnerable to cold. The protein deficiency in the autopsy results appeared to support this, at least partially. An undernourished group caught overnight in freezing temperatures without fire, then continuing to exert themselves at altitude the following day. There is a physiological logic to mounting exhaustion and collapse, but it does not explain the blood. It does not explain the speed. Malnutrition and exhaustion do not typically produce the acute, simultaneous, violent symptom onset that Yushchenko described. They do not produce bleeding from the eyes, ears, and nose, and froth at the mouth, in a previously walking, moving, conscious young man in the space of a few seconds. Golias blamed the dead woman. Korovina could not answer the accusation. What do we know about Valentina Yushchenko? Almost nothing beyond the bare outline of those terrible days. She was 17. She survived something that killed everyone around her and carried the weight of that survival back down the mountain alone. She gave her testimony to police, and then, as far as any public record extends, she fell silent. According to those who have researched the case most carefully, she has not spoken publicly about the incident since her initial police statement in 1993. She has given no interviews. She has sought no visibility. This is not unusual for someone who has survived a traumatic event at the threshold of adulthood. It is not a mysterious detail. It is simply what trauma can do. It can collapse a person's relationship to the event so completely that the only available response is to not speak of it, to refuse to give it further form in words, to hold it at a distance that makes continued living possible. But it means that the central witness to the central event is, by choice, absent from the record. Her account, filtered through police reports and second-hand reconstructions, is all we have of those minutes on the mountainside. The sequence of collapses. The blood. Tatyana Filipenko clawing at her own throat and smashing her head against a rock until she stopped moving. The two youngest members of the group running and dying while they ran. Denis Shvachkin falling in the open, convulsing. These images come to us through a 17-year-old girl who spent 4 days afterward alone in the Siberian wilderness before anyone found her. She carried this in her body and in her mind across 60 kilometers of mountain terrain. She was, in the fullest sense of the word, alone with it. Alexander Kryson was 23. He was at the back of the group. The last thing he did was scream. Tatyana Filipenko was 24. She went to help her instructor and never left that slope. Denis Shvachkin, at 19, ran as far as his body would allow. Victoria Zalasova was 16. Timur Bapanov was 15 years old, and he ran until his legs gave out beneath him, and he died on a Siberian mountainside in the August cold. Lyudmila Korovina, 41, a woman who had given years of her life to teaching people how to survive wild places, who called the weather station before she set out and confirmed the forecast and packed sufficient food and equipment, and led her students up the mountain in the morning and made sure they had breakfast before they walked. She died running to the aid of a student in crisis, collapsing on top of him, her heart finally giving out under a weight that no training, no experience, no competence could have prepared her for. 31 years have passed since August 5, 1993. The Khamar-Daban Mountains are still there. Hikers still cross them in the summer months. The taiga still descends from the alpine plateau to the shores of Lake Baikal, and the ridgelines still catch the weather moving off the water, and the exposed peaks above 2,000 meters still grow dangerous very quickly when the wind turns and the temperature drops. The case remains officially closed. Hypothermia, heart attack, malnutrition as a contributing factor. The file, somewhere in a Russian archive, draws no further conclusions. The bruised lungs remain unexplained. The speed of onset remains unexplained. The simultaneous nature of multiple collapses remains unexplained. The survival of Valentina Yutachenko, standing in the same location, breathing the same air, on the same slope, at the same altitude, on the same morning, remains unexplained. Some events surrender to investigation. Some events yield their logic gradually, over time, as better tools and better understanding and better access to information slowly reduce the perimeter of what is not known. And some events remain at the edge of comprehension, not because they are supernatural, not because they require recourse to anything beyond the physical and the documented, but because the physical record is incomplete and the witnesses are silent and the mountains do not explain themselves. There is a photograph. 7 people standing at a trailhead, squinting against the light, packs on their backs, the mountains behind them. 6 of them will not come home. 1 of them will walk out of the wilderness alone, covered in the blood of people she could not save, and spend the rest of her life, by all evidence, trying not to think about what she saw. The mountains of the Khamar-Daban are still there. Whatever happened on that slope is still there with them, buried in the official record, buried in the permafrost, buried in the silence of the one person who saw all of it and survived. We do not know what killed those people. We may never know. And perhaps that, in the end, is the most disturbing truth of all. Not that something terrible happened on that mountain, but that the world can hold an event of this magnitude, can absorb 6 deaths and 1 shattered life, and offer, in return, nothing more conclusive than a cold official verdict and an archive of unanswered questions. The mountain took what it took, and it gave nothing back.